Hi, I'll begin with the chapter on the Anschlag from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. Wenn man, statt einen Ton simpel anzugeben, die vorige Note noch einmal wiederholt und alsdann mit einer Sekunde von oben in die folgende heruntergeht, oder wenn man, statt diese vorhergehende Note zu wiederholen, die Untersekunde von der folgenden zuerst anschlägt und darauf mit der Sekunde von oben in dieselbe geht, so nennt man dieses den Anschlag. Wir werden diese Manier aus der Tab 6, Figur 80 befindlichen Abbildung deutlicher kennenlernen. Vermöge welcher wir sehen, dass sie auf zweierlei Art vorkommt. Here's figure 80 from tab 6, where we can see the Anschlag coming in two different forms. Although there's no bow that Bach often used to indicate alternative continuations, I'm guessing that both variations of Anschlag are being presented as alternate continuations of the D upbeat. In the first version of Anschlag, we can see how the first note of the Anschlag repeats the preceding note, just as Bach says it does. And its second note, the C, is approaching the principal note from a second above. So it's a C going to a B. That the first note of this first type of Anschlag repeats the preceding note is a very important detail. It is a key first step to knowing or understanding how and when to use it in a piece. When I was researching what the Anschlag might be called in English, I was wondering if, there was an English term I could use. And the only one I saw was a double appoggiatura, which is completely wrong. And the translations for Anschlag would be attack or stroke or strike or backstop. And I was wondering about calling it a stroke. I wasn't so convinced. Backstop I'm not too adverse to, because it does describe definitely the second type of Anschlag there from figure 80. But I don't see why it can't just be left as the Anschlag. There's enough, forte, piano, all these things. There's enough terms that aren't in English. Not everything needs to be in English. So I thought maybe Anschlag could just be called the Anschlag. So yeah, when I was researching what the Anschlag might be called in English, I looked at some explanations of this variation of it, and never once saw it mentioned that the first note of this Anschlag repeats the preceding note. This Anschlag was always looked at in complete isolation. And that is an example of the half-baked information the Roll of Honour is content to work with and provide its customers. And you can imagine when this detail is absent, when the Anschlag is presented in complete isolation, the uncertainty as to how to use the ornament that would ensue. One big question would be, at least for me, how do I know what note that first note is meant to be? Because it's not always going to be the same, or is it? is it always a seventh below the second note? Or could it be a fifth, or a sixth, or a fourth below? It wouldn't be clear. But that won't be asked, because with so little information, and with none of it catching, the reaction will be to move on. Forget about it. That it's not that important, not that relevant, and only play it when it is encountered in the score. Just play the notes, because the way the roll of honour presents it, it won't mean anything to anyone anyhow. It'll remain abstract and thus pointless. So, the first note of this variation of Anschlag repeats the preceding note. When decorating the fermata in the prelude of Johann Sebastian Bach's 24th Fugue, Prelude and Fugue in B minor from Book 2 of his Well-Tempered Clavier. So there's a fermata there which I embellished. So embellishing that, making it up as I go along. I used this variation of Anschlag. I would never have been able to incorporate this ornament in an improvisation if I had been reliant on the insufficient information the roll of honour provides and possesses. And for anybody who's, having seen the videos on the chapter on the brace, there was another tip from Bach that he provided there that I was as well able to use in that decoration of the fermata. Wenn in langsamer Zeitmasse 3 Noten heruntersteigen, so entsteht vor der mittelsten ein Vorschlag, worauf über solcher der prallende Doppelschlag eintritt, welchen ein abermaliger Vorschlag vor der letzten Note nachfolgt. Dieser Fall ist bei Figur 66 einfach A mit seinem Zieraten B und mit seiner Ausführung C abgebildet. Der erste Vorschlag ist etwas Gewöhnliches bei langsamen Noten, indem sie gut ausfüllt. Außerdem aber war hier nötig, den prallenden Doppelschlag bequem und nicht eher anzubringen, als bis die Hälfte der Note, worüber sich befindet, vorbei war, welche Hälfte just ausfüllt. Der letzte Vorschlag dient nicht nur zur Verkürzung der letzten langen Note, damit sie wegen ihrer Dauer ein Verhältnis mit der vorigen bekomme, sondern ist auch nötig wegen der Natur des Doppelschlages, welcher, wie der ihm ähnliche Triller mit dem Nachschlage, sich gerne in die Höhe neigt. Man darf diesen letzten Vorschlag nicht von seiner Note abreißen. 1, weil es ein Vorschlag und kein Nachschlag sein soll. 2, weil nach der gegebenen Erklärung von den Doppelschlägen die letzte Note derselben niemals mit der folgenden sogleich verbunden werden darf und allezeit ein kleiner Zeitraum übrig bleiben muss, damit, widrigenfalls, kein Triller mit der dritten verwerflichen nachschlagenden Note daraus entstehe. 3. Die proportionierte Geltung der letzten Note beizubehalten. Wir sehen hier abermal, was das Abreisen der Vorschläge von ihrer Note für Schaden tun kann. Dieses leichter zu verhüten, macht man den prallenden Doppelschlag nach der Regel so scharf als möglich, damit das C wie ein simples Sechzehnteil zu klingen scheine. Hierdurch wird der folgende Vorschlag hinlänglich von dieser Manier abgesondert. Ungeachtet die abgebildete Ausführung dieser Passage ziemlich bunt aussieht und noch fürchterlicher scheinen könnte, wenn sie so, wie sie simpel bei dem Adagio oft vorzukommen pflegt, nämlich mit noch einmal so geschwinden Noten ausgeschrieben würde, so berührt doch die ganze Kunst der geschickten Ausführung auf die Fertigkeit, einen rechten, scharfen Pralltriller zu machen. Und die Ausnahme muss alsdann ganz natürlich und leichte ausfallen. Bei D ist das Exempel etwas verändert. Es behält aber dennoch dieselbe Ausführung bei den letzten zwei Noten. So, that is an example of how a proper knowledge of ornamentation helps one effectively incorporate those ornaments into their playing. That's why you need more information than the roll of honor provides. The second variation of Anschlag, as we can see in figure 80, begins with a second below the principal note and arrives there via the second from above, just as Bach said. So we can see from that figure that they occur in two different ways. Der Vortrag von diesen Nötchen ist im ersten Falle nicht so hurtig als im zweiten. Allezeit aber werden sie schwächer als die Hauptnote gespielt. Figur 81. Der Gesang wird durch diese Manier gefällig, indem die Noten teils gut zusammengehängt, teils auch einigermaßen ausgefüllt werden. Bach shows us here in figure 81 how the two types of Anschlag are to be performed or expressed. I wouldn't suppose I'd need to mention how important this aspect of it is. Yet in the explanations provided by the roll of honor that I saw, this was also completely absent. Except for them saying the ornament can be performed before the beat, so that one then auf eine raue Art in die Hauptnote hineinplumpt. Because that's what happens when one does that. Alle durch kleine Nötchen angedeutete Manieren gehören zur folgenden Note. Folglich darf niemals der vorhergehenden etwas von ihrer Geltung abgebrochen werden. Which is what would happen if one were to play the ornament before the beat. Indem bloß die folgende so viel verliert, als die kleinen Nötchen betragen. Vermöge dieser Regel werden also statt der folgenden Hauptnote diese kleinen Nötchen zum Basse oder anderen Stimmen zugleich angeschlagen. So überflüssig es scheinen könnte, zugleich zu erinnern, dass die anderen Stimmen samt dem Basse zur ersten Note, welche in einer Manier steckt, zugleich eingeschlagen werden müssen, so oft wird dem ungeachtet hier wieder gefehlt. The roll of honor was no different then than it is today. In one article written by a retired university professor, an example was provided of a dotted Anschlag, which Bach will be covering in this chapter. But the example the professor provided was incorrect. He took bar 3 of the opening motif of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, the first movement, and incorrectly identified the idea sung by the main voice as a dotted Anschlag. The harmony is G major. He identified the A as the principal note, which shows he was just looking for a pattern that matched that of a dotted Anschlag, because the A was in the place where the principal note of a dotted Anschlag would be. So he called that the principal note, which betrays a completely superficial or an artificial understanding, an artificial intelligence. The principal notes of a G major harmony are either G, B, or D. The A in this context is a passing note, not a principal note. That professor was showing examples of how the dotted rhythm or the dotted Anschlag can appear in pieces written out, and he picked that. But what he did was he didn't pick a dotted Anschlag. Yeah, so he identified over a G major harmony the A is the principal note, but the principal notes of a G major harmony are either G, B, or D. That he didn't know any of this and thus mistakenly identified the motif as a dotted Anschlag didn't really matter, because he hadn't mentioned a word about how any of the Anschlags are to be performed. But were people to believe him on the basis of his list of those credentials that the roll of honor like to invent and award each other, with no grown-ups in the room, on the basis of his career, and had he said anything about its performance, it would have led to those that believed him performing that opening idea incorrectly and creating new problems for themselves. Problems that have nothing to do with Beethoven's music. Just like Chopin wrote, people have tried out all kinds of methods of learning to play the piano. Methods that are tedious and useless and have nothing to do with the study of this instrument. It doesn't teach us how to play the music itself. And the type of difficulty we are practicing is not the difficulty encountered in good music, the music of the great masters. It's an abstract difficulty, a new genre of acrobatics. But like I said, it didn't matter, because the information was so inconsequential. In the cage you can do what you like, because nothing is of consequence. We can see from figure 81 that the two notes of the Anschlag are performed quieter than the principal note, and that the second type is executed faster than the first. Okay, I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll pick up where I left off in the next video. Thanks. Bye.